Hey guys, Todd Zwillick with Vice News DC Bureau here. Well, here we are entering the very last month of Donald Trump's presidency, and speculation is flying, rumors are flying about the one power that President Trump has that he holds most dear. That's the presidential pardon. Now, Donald Trump has used the pardon in some ways pretty conservatively. By my last count, well, hopefully we're not dating this, less than 30, only 29 pardons has this president issued. That's really, really low in for presidents in history. Somebody will correct me on that, but I think that's low. Except Donald Trump uses the pardon more than any other president to benefit his favorite person, Donald Trump, and his friends, people who might know things about Donald Trump, people who might help Donald Trump's politics. Well, here we are, like I said, in the very last month of Donald Trump's presidency, and we need to talk about the pardons. Especially, we need to talk about the pardoning, as I mentioned, of Donald Trump's very favorite person, Donald Trump. Could it happen? How might he do it? Might Mike Pence participate in some kind of scheme to absolve President Trump of any potential federal crimes he could be accused of in the future? We're going to talk about all of it. Greg Walters is here with me, my colleague, fellow reporter at Vice News. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Todd. How you doing?
Yeah, good to have you. I'm good, man. Rebecca Roythe is with us as well. Rebecca is a professor at New York Law School, but also a former assistant DA in Manhattan. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have both of you. Now, Greg, let me start with you because I mentioned that Donald Trump really hasn't pardoned that many people. Let's just set the table here. I looked up, you can name a couple of the most famous ones right off the top of your head who've gotten pardons. Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor for, I think, 1.5 Scaramucci's or maybe less. Who can remember Dinesh D'Souza, former intellectual, current right-wing bomb thrower who was pardoned by Donald Trump? What are some of your favorites?
Well, you said something right off the top that that he's used the pardon power somewhat conservatively, and that's one way to look at it. If you look at it by the numbers, right before we started, I went up and looked at how many pardons most presidents have issued, and Trump has used the pardon power, if you include commutations and pardons, so total clemency. He's used it something like 40 or 50 times, which turns out is less than any president before him, going at least all the way back to McKinley, who died in 1901, by my count. He's just not on the map. But his pardons, from my point of view, seem to fall into three buckets. He's pardoned a bunch of his friends and his allies. Mike Flynn, his first national security advisor, who was convicted of, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador during the last transition. He commuted the sentence of Roger Stone, his buddy of 30 years, former political advisor, who did a lot of shenanigans during the campaign and then lied about it. Trump commuted his sentence. Then you also have these kind of weird, sort of high-profile pardons where, for some reason, Trump seems to think this is going to work for him, that his people are going to want to see this. I think of them as like trophy pardons. Rod Blagojevich. Maybe you guys know. I've never been able to understand why he pardoned the former governor of Illinois, who was convicted of bribery. Like, why did he do that? Except perhaps to get people used to the idea of Trump pardoning people for corruption. I mean, that one just never made sense to me. Or Susan B. Anthony, historical suffragette. She was convicted of voting before women had the right to vote. You could applaud that, but it's not like she needed it, right? This is more like a trophy pardon. So, and then there are like the third category of people who, for whatever reason, maybe might have been more in the classic case of deserving a pardon, who maybe Trump's celebrity friend like Kim Kardashian came up to him and said, "Hey, we really want you to get this person out of jail. They don't deserve it." Trump said, "Yeah, sure, I'll get them out of jail." And he did. But we're now heading into a season where everyone is expecting Trump to just go totally hog wild with pardons coming up. at the end of his presidency. And if he doesn't, it's going to be a big surprise.
Because he can issue those and escape the kind of accountability that a re-election or a campaign might bring. Rebecca, I have a question for you since you're the only lawyer in the room and the expert. We talk about pardons, Dinesh D'Souza, Michael Flynn, Joe Arpaio, Rod Blagojevich, or maybe, I can't remember. Was Blagojevich a pardon or a commutation, Greg?
I believe he was a full pardon. I'd have to look that up, but I think he was a full pardon.
Okay, but Rebecca, Roger Stone is different. Roger Stone wasn't pardoned. He had his sentence commuted. Why? It seems to me like there's a difference there, and like that was an important difference with Roger Stone. Why commute his sentence and not give your best buddy and champion Republican rat fucker a full pardon?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the main differences between giving somebody a full-out pardon and a commutation, or what fits in constitutionally under the term reprieve, is the effect that it has on the person's ability to claim the Fifth Amendment privilege against compelled self-incrimination. And, it does raise eyebrows. Like, why would he want to make sure that some of these people can't speak or have the ability to say to invoke that right? And, I don't know, does he have something on him? I mean, wouldn't it be crazy to think that? So that's one of the main differences between those two. Somebody might want a full out pardon because that's, more of a actual exoneration, but there are implications for it legally that might be concerning.
So just to be clear here, so that the laypersons watching us can understand, if you get your sentence commuted, you still have your Fifth Amendment rights against talking and incriminating yourself. But if you're pardoned, you don't have constitutional protections against incriminating yourself in that crime anymore, right? So, and we're speaking hypothetically here, if Roger Stone were fully pardoned for his multiple federal convictions, lying to Congress, intimidating witnesses on behalf of Trump, he could be compelled to testify.
That's 100% right. Now, it's possible that he could still claim the Fifth Amendment privilege, suggesting that he could be prosecuted in a state court. But as long as it's really a federal crime, there's just no way out. And then, he would have had to speak. And if there was a later federal criminal investigation into Donald Trump, he may be forced to say things that are contrary to Donald Trump's interest. And that is obviously one of the things that President Trump's trying to prevent against.
Now, the rumors and the speculation are flying, Greg. You touched on it. We're in the last month. We're entering the last month of Donald Trump's presidency here. People are expecting the pardons to fly because Donald Trump has friends or alleged potential possible accomplices, maybe. I don't know of any crime specifically, although I have read the Mueller report, or maybe just people who could help him in his future. So people are speculating on potential pardons. I noticed just the other day, Mike Pence got vaccinated against COVID, and he's not the only one close to Trump who's going to be wanting some immunity out of this deal. Rumors have been flying, Greg, about Alan Weisselberg, who's Donald Trump's chief accountant for many, many years. That's just one name. Why might Weisselberg be game for a pardon, and who else are you hearing about?
Well, so one of the things that I think is really important to remember here, and Rebecca, feel free to straighten me out if I get this wrong. Again, you're the actual lawyer in the room. But my understanding is that the president has a lot of power to pardon people, not only for crimes they've actually already been charged with, but for future crimes they could be charged with that they may have already committed. So the line here is that if the president pardons you right now, he could write the pardon in a way that would cover your past behavior, but wouldn't cover your future behavior. So this is important because these are the kinds of pardons that are probably going to be the most controversial and could also cover the most ground. And if you go back to Nixon and Ford is the classic example, right? Nixon wrote a pardon. Ford wrote a pardon for Nixon after Nixon stepped down in disgrace that said, I'm going to pardon you for basically everything you did from the day you took office to the day you stepped down. Just blanket, boom, you can't charge him for anything for those 5 years. And to get back to your question, what we're now widely expecting Trump to do is something that, to my knowledge, is totally unprecedented, which is use those blanket pardons for his friends, for his family, for anyone he thinks might have been involved in sketchy behavior on his behalf, or just a guy he knows, or a friend of his, or just handed out like a Christmas present, or just turn around and say, boom, you have a total get out of jail free card for anything that you did over the past however many years. And for all we know, Trump might be about to write some very, very broad pardons because a lot of people around him did a lot of sketchy stuff. So there have been all these investigations going into the Trump organization which is a family business, which, employs his 3 adult children, Eric, Don Jr., Ivanka. There's also his CFO, whose name is Alan Weisselberg, who has played a role. We don't know exactly what the role was, exactly how much he knew in helping to orchestrate the hush money payments to the women who say they slept with Trump and then received payments during the campaign. Stormy Daniels and help me out, Todd. What was the other one's name? I forgot.
Karen McDougal.
Thank you. So Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. So we're widely expecting to see Trump just stand up on like Zeus on Mount Olympus and say, none of this can be federally prosecuted for any of you people. And there's the CNN report is that he's got a spreadsheet in the White House now where they're just putting people's names in there. And it could be a lot of pardons coming soon.
So Rebecca, what are the limits here? Does Greg have the legality right? Like is Trump's pardon power so unlimited that he could pick, his CFO of the Trump organization who's talked to investigators, who had some limited immunity, we're told earlier, to talk to investigators about his role in orchestrating payments, and just say, you are hereby pardoned from any potential prosecution from I don't know, such date to today? Can he do that?
Yeah, I mean, Greg is basically right. This is what's called a plenary power in the Constitution, which means it's like there are no limits. There are no limits on purpose. It's just in there, which means it is huge in scope. But that doesn't mean it's unlimited. And so Greg's absolutely right that, the president can't give somebody a get out of jail free card for future crimes, but basically that anything that's happened in the past, the president can give a pardon for. Now, here are a couple of the limitations because they're kind of relevant to what Greg was just saying. So one is a lot of scholars do actually think that there may be a problem with these very broad grants of a pardon. So in the past, for sure, you can say something like everybody, like say, take Scooter Libby, like everybody, for every crime related to this investigation, that would be legit, totally kosher. But if you just say for any crime like Ford did, that was never tested in court. And what if it was? Some scholars do actually think you have to specify something. Now, I don't, it's like Trump is like, the one thing is like law professors around the world, like they're going to be depressed on January 20th because this has just been, it's like food, they're like, they run to it and they can, it's like all of us have just been sitting in a tiny little office doing this and we're like, oh my God, people want to hear us now. So, there are a lot of different views on this and it's kind of complicated, but that's at least one question mark where there are some people who say if he just did a broad one like that, that could be challenged. Now, here's the thing. He has an interest in making very broad statements, partially because of what Greg said, but also because if he's more specific, one, it sounds like an admission, like they might have committed a crime and he doesn't want to do that. Two, he doesn't want to give a kind of roadmap to state prosecutors because you could say like, here's everything they did, like go find some state crimes in there. He doesn't want to do that either. So he obviously much prefers this kind of broad statement. My guess is he actually would also go on Twitter and say, they're all innocent. I'm just doing this anyway, but, so he has political reasons to just be like, oh yeah, I'm giving these pardons out, but nobody did anything wrong because they're all perfect because everybody near me is perfect and I'm perfect. I don't know. That's also never been tested. And then, of course, there's the question of the self-pardon, which we haven't gotten to either. That may be another limit on the pardon power, because there are these powers and they have to fit into the rest of the structure of the Constitution. And so people look at it and they say, if we view this power that broadly, it might be inconsistent with other things in the Constitution. And then, a court might say no if it actually got to the point of reviewing it.
Well, you mentioned the problem of setting up a roadmap for potential prosecutors with a pardon, and put a pin in that, because I want to come back to that, especially as it relates to potential pardons. Again, we're talking about rumors and speculation, let's be clear, for Trump's children and what might happen if they're given broad pardons. But Rebecca, I got to ask you about the breadth of this power as well, and what can be challenged in court, because there is this, you called it the plenary power. That means it's broad. In some ways almost unlimited. But could somebody challenge a pardon if it were for corrupt purposes, or they thought it were? Like, for instance, if the president is the one granting a pardon to a friend because the friend may have participated in a crime on behalf of the president and may have information, and maybe the president wants to keep that person happy, let's say, I'm a lawyer now, and I'm here to argue that that's a pardon for a corrupt purpose. That's a pardon to benefit the president himself. Does a pardon like that hold up? Is that challengeable?
So, yes, I think it would be. It's really hard to prove. So just to take a step back, there's a difference between two things. One is just a kind of sleazy pardon. So you could just pardon your friends, just because you want to, or, these are my favorite bad guys and I'm going to pardon them. And that might be sleazy. That might be something that we all look at later and history frowns on, that was a really awful act by a bad president, or even a good president doing something bad. There's a difference between that and what you're talking about, which is an abuse of power. So if you were a prosecutor and you could actually prove that there was some kind of quid pro quo, in other words, I am giving you this pardon in exchange for you, doing this favor for me. And it could be anything. It could be money. It could be not testifying against me. It could be, any number of things, giving me a job in the future. Anything like that could constitute bribery or obstruction of justice. And those are independent crimes and could be investigated and prosecuted. The problem is those things are so hard to prove because they rest on intent. And unless there's they were stupid enough to leave a paper trail where it's here, I'm giving you this, in exchange for, which is just
right.
Except for, that would be a bad movie plot. Even really bad, dumb criminals don't do that. So it would be extremely hard to prove those things. But if you could prove it, that is another limit on the pardon power. So it is important to point that out, that it is really broad and you can use it in a sleazy way. And it's a political power. So it's a political power where the check is, the election. And obviously we don't have another election. So there is no check except for the legacy of the president's political legacy.
Now, I mentioned at the top that President Trump has pardoned lots of friends. He may be considering pardoning lots more of his friends for different purposes. But we got to talk about the president pardoning his very, very favorite person in the world, and that's himself. Now, speculation on this question is wild. Greg, you and I have been spending a lot of time lately talking about the possibility of Donald Trump maybe pardoning himself, but more broadly, Donald Trump getting a pardon sometime between now and noon on January 20th. So I want to talk about those scenarios real quick, and we don't have 17 hours to talk about all the potential things that Donald Trump might need a pardon for. But real quick, just to set the table, bring us up to speed, might be speculating a bit on why Donald Trump may need a pardon. Why does he potentially think he might have some federal criminal exposure here that even starts this conversation?
Sure. I mean, one, you could sum it up. If you had to do it very briefly, you could sum it up in two words: Michael Cohen. He's got President Trump allegedly directed the hush money payments that Michael Cohen orchestrated to the women who claim they slept with Trump during the payments that were made around the time of the 2016 campaign. So those were deemed to be campaign finance violations and were part of why Michael Cohen went to jail. So those are going to be a potential issue for Trump going forward. Then you've also got the legacy of the Mueller investigation. The Mueller report did not accuse President Trump of committing a crime. But essentially, the only reason that it doesn't is because Mueller decided that because the Department of Justice policy said you can't indict a sitting president, it wouldn't be fair to formally say this guy actually broke the law because Trump didn't have the opportunity to clear his name. You could make an argument that Trump had every opportunity to try to clear his name on Twitter, but that's not how Bob Mueller looked at it. Bob Mueller said, you can't clear your name in the court. I can't accuse you of breaking the law. But my understanding is that over 1,000 former prosecutors have signed an open letter saying that that report contains sufficient evidence to charge Trump with obstruction of justice during the Russia investigation. So there's another bucket of potential criminality. And then finally, you've got a lot of question marks about Trump's business practices, about his tax returns, about issues involving tax payments around a property called Seven Springs, which is in Westchester County, which has a bunch of investigations going on. And so it's also very important to remember that these pardons would only protect him from the federal investigations. And there's a whole separate issue of state investigations that would not be protected. You can put those aside for a second. But there are lots of reasons why Trump could really use a pardon for himself going forward.
And we should be clear. I mean, the Mueller investigation doesn't accuse Donald Trump of any crimes, but does describe in plain language instances where Mueller believed obstruction of justice occurred on behalf of Trump, even though he didn't call it a crime. And I think 4 instances where that alleged obstruction met the criteria for chargeable obstruction. Do I have that right, Rebecca?
Yes. I mean, I say yes and no because right, exactly. He, as Greg said, he fell short of saying these facts support criminal obstruction of justice charges. And so therefore didn't come to that actual conclusion, but laid out facts and clearly said where, as you are right, he clearly said where I'm not giving my opinion, these are possible counts that could amount to obstruction of justice. And a lot of former prosecutors who have looked at that evidence have agreed, and as you say, Greg, written that letter, that this is more than sufficient, that if this were not the president, similar acts like this would definitely be charged as obstruction of justice. So that leaves him wide open to an investigation and charges in the Biden administration. Now, I'm not sure Biden has the political appetite to do that. That's an entire, that's a different question, but I would certainly be concerned. I wouldn't want to rest on his magnanimity if I were President Trump, especially given my own attitude toward the Department of Justice. So, that question remains.
Did you hear? You heard Greg's list, Rebecca. Do you have any other potential criminal activity or potential federal exposure, criminal exposure that Donald Trump might be thinking about that he might want a pardon for outside of those areas that Greg mentioned?
I guess I might include the Ukraine. I don't think there was anything that was laid out there particularly that was, anybody said was criminal. There was so much focus on impeachment there and on abuse of power that nobody was really sitting there parsing, is this a crime? Would this be a crime? But we don't know. We haven't seen fully of those facts. The Senate ended up, voting without looking at the facts. So it's a little hard to know. And I do think that I would be worried about that too, especially in terms of, if we're thinking, campaign finance, things like that. There could be criminal activity involved in and around the impeachment material with the Ukraine too.
I mean, Greg, House managers were pretty clear in their presentation that they considered the president's use of federally appropriated funds for the president's political purposes as bribery, right?
That is, if you look back at the House Judiciary Committee's referral to the House Intelligence Committee, the House Judiciary Committee actually has an entire report which includes a whole bunch of pages on actions that Trump took, and in that instance that the House Judiciary said, yep, that's a crime. They singled out bribery, honest services fraud, and witness intimidation. Now, the bigger question, in my mind at least, is whether there are any federal prosecutors, whether Joe Biden's future attorney general, whether Joe Biden himself, who has pledged that he won't be involved in making the decision, whether anybody is going to look at that and say they have the appetite for having that fight with the former president of the United States.
Whether they have the appetite, indeed. All right. So I think that we've laid out plenty of motivation for our main character here. I think we've established that the guy's wanting some form of absolution as he leaves the protective blanket of being president and all of the protections of what's called the OLC memo. He can't be charged as president and all the rest of it. Now, let's get to the real meaty center of this conversation. Greg, you and I have been talking a lot lately about how the president might get one of these pardons. You have three grand scenarios, three avenues that Donald Trump could take to get himself that golden ticket to freedom for the rest of his life, or at least from freedom from a federal prison for the rest of his life. So there are three of them. I'll start you off. I think you call them the full Nixon, right? The full Trump, and what's the last one?
And the switcheroo.
The switcheroo. I can't wait for the switcheroo. All right, let me start you with the full Nixon. What's a full Nixon? How could Donald Trump do it?
So the full Nixon would be for Trump to actually step down from the presidency and let Mike Pence pardon him. As far as we know, as far as I know, and Rebecca, please correct me. Again, you know more about the law than the rest of us put together. But as far as I know, almost everyone I've spoken to thinks that would probably stand up. Again, going back to the issue of how broad it could be, maybe he would write something that's so broad it wouldn't work, or that would somehow inadvertently appear to cover future activity. There are ways they could potentially still screw this up, so don't underestimate their ability to do that. But chances are that would be a very tight, solid pardon that would get Trump out of the clear for a whole bunch of stuff. But it has a huge problem, which is Trump's ego. Trump is going around obsessed still with arguing that he didn't actually lose his reelection campaign. And if he steps down, he would be the second president in American history to resign the office in disgrace because he's fleeing his own criminal jeopardy. And you can just hear the angry voice in Donald Trump's head telling himself, this didn't really happen, that, you can see the tweets, they write themselves. This would be perhaps Trump's best legal strategy, but it is unpalatable, I think, to his, let's say, style of leadership.
All right, Rebecca, we call this one the full Nixon because this is pretty much what happened in 1973 when Richard Nixon stepped down, Gerald Ford became president, and he granted a pardon to Richard Nixon. 73 or 74? I might have the year wrong. Somebody check up on me. At any rate, how would you have to structure this if Donald Trump wanted to do a full Nixon? 3 days before his term ends, step down from the presidency. President Pence has the power. He's going to sign the document that makes this all worthwhile. What would that have to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Greg that that's the best shot of having a pardon that would hold up later on if it were tested. Now, again, he could pardon himself or, do some different kind of pardon and just hope that it's not tested. But that's the most, that's the sure thing. I do think there's some question about whether it could be as broad as Ford's pardon of Nixon, which was so broad. It was basically like any crime between, while he was president. And I mean, that is an extremely broad pardon. Now, I mean, there are lots of people who think that's perfectly fine and constitutional, but you might have a question mark there. A better way, even more sure way, would be to say anything in relationship to the Mueller investigation, anything in relation to business crimes, arising out of, anything he could do to just be a little bit more specific would actually make it even more lasting and even more solid a pardon. But other than that, I'm with Greg. That's a pretty sure way to go.
But then, Rebecca, I mean, then you run the risk of it looking like a laundry list, right? Like if you have to be legally specific to make sure it holds up. Okay, I'm Mike Pence, and I'm going to sign the pardon parchment, whatever it's called, the document. In this case, and I'm inventing this, it would have to say, for any crimes arising from the so-called Mueller investigation, for any crimes arising from alleged business practices, for any crimes arising from alleged campaign finance violations,
right.
For any crimes arising, well, I guess, I suppose that Ukraine doesn't even necessarily arise from the Mueller report. So for any crimes arising from alleged activities with respect to Ukraine and the government of Ukraine and the campaign. So I've got 4 right there. And that's starting to, I mean, this is politics. That's starting to look like a rap sheet.
Yeah, that sounds like a confession. I think it's like, this is the thing. It's like you're navigating a really rough, water where you have to fit yourself between those two things, which is be specific enough to hold up in court and be general enough to look like you're not making any kind of admission. You're just, sure that the Biden Department of Justice is going to be corrupt and go after you for these reasons. So that's exactly what you're trying to do, is make it broad enough that you're not making it sound like a confession, but narrow enough that it'll hold up in court. And maybe the choice is, I kind of agree with Greg that given his personality, he's not going to like that laundry list. He's going to keep insisting, I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. So he's going to want the next, he's going to want just anything he did. And then later on, he's just going to get up there and be like, I did nothing. I just don't trust those guys. Like, of course, they're going to come after me like they all do in this witch hunt. And then, he'll go off in that direction. He wants to have it both ways, where he gets that pardon, but he never has to admit or have anybody suspect that he did anything wrong.
Right. I was totally exonerated. I never did anything wrong. The witch hunt would try to get me. Therefore, I need a pardon to protect myself from these corrupt Democrats and who want to destroy me. I'm doing my best to channel our president after 4 years of covering him. Yeah.
Post-presidential harassment, I guess they could call it.
Okay. All right. So that's the universe of the full Nixon. That's number 1. Greg, your scenario number 2 is called the full Trump. What's that?
The full Trump. So let's assume for the moment that you are the voice inside Trump's head, which I think we've all been listening to for the past 4 years, right? That voice says, I don't need Pence to pardon me. I'm going to finish my term. I didn't even lose my last election campaign. They stole it from me. I'm just going to pardon myself. So my understanding is that no president in history has had the chutzpah to simply say, I'm just doing it. I'm just going to pardon myself for whatever crimes I may have committed. And so the issue is that no one really knows if it'll work. And there are very smart people on both sides of that argument. Some people saying, well, there don't seem to be any restrictions on the presidential pardon in this area. No reason to think the Constitution doesn't let you do that. And then other people say, no, the framers didn't have this in mind. And back in 1974, Nixon at least explored this idea. And his Department of Justice wrote him a little memo, which doesn't have any explanation, really, except it says that it doesn't think that pardoning himself would work, because on the principle that nobody could be a judge in their own case. So that's pretty much the only official verdict we have on this question. But if Trump tried it, there are a lot of people who think it would just collapse in a poof of constitutionality.
Well, let's ask our expert. I mean, Rebecca, Trump, you can definitely see the Trumpian ego attracted to the idea of pardoning himself. I think Mike Pence would like that because it would mean he wouldn't have to be involved. So that would be attractive there if Trump cares. What would the fight look like if President Trump tried to pardon himself?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Greg that it's questionable. There is that memo from the Office of Legal Counsel, which is, the same entity that issued the general view that presidents can't be indicted, while sitting presidents can't be indicted. It's not binding law. It's essentially the executive department's view of the law at the moment. First of all, it could be changed. So he could get his now acting attorney general, Jeffrey Rosen, and say, hey, write me a new memo saying that it's fine to pardon yourself. And, who knows what happened behind the scenes? Maybe Bill Barr wasn't willing to do that. Maybe that's part of the reason that he was pushed out. I don't know. But again, either way, it doesn't necessarily bind a court. A court can look at that and just say, we disagree with your constitutional reasoning, especially since, as Greg said, there isn't much reasoning in there. So yeah, scholars have just looked at this from both sides, and many of them have said what I said before, which is, yes, it's a broad power. Yes, there aren't any limitations. It's plenary. But if we were to interpret it this way, it would be inconsistent with the language of the Constitution, the structure of the Constitution, and the intent of the founders. And I think that's a pretty good argument, in part because of the history, which is not only has no president ever done this, but I don't want to make any broad proclamation, but I don't know of any monarch. This is a long history. Pardons didn't just start in America. It's like Anglo-American law, and I don't know of anybody who has done any ruler. So it seems like they certainly weren't considering this. And when you put that along with, some of the other arguments about the Constitution never having intended this to be the use of the pardon power, you could see how a court, especially a court now composed of justices who believe very much in the original public meaning of the Constitution, dictates its meaning now, saying no way. So if it were challenged in court, so how it would happen, I suppose, is President Trump will be indicted, and he would challenge it on the grounds of, no, you can't bring, that would be double jeopardy. I've been pardoned for, everything by myself. And then the court would rule on that and would go up to the Supreme Court. You're right that there are arguments on both sides. On this one, I think that argument that self-pardons are not constitutional are stronger than the arguments that they are. Because, of course, there are tons of really broad powers in the Constitution, but none of them are endless. So, you do end up having to look at other things to try to figure out their meaning.
It does kind of strike you on its face as sort of the unalloyed definition of autocracy, the self-pardon. But on the other hand, Greg mentioned a principle that was in that Office of Legal Counsel memo that always struck me, that there's a principle that you can't be a judge in your own case. Therefore, a self-pardon might not pass legal muster. But Rebecca, what about, maybe we have to parse a little bit, but I heard that and then I thought, well, okay, but then if I'm Trump's lawyer, I might come back and argue, well, he's not a judge because he's the executive. So the principle that you can't be a judge in your own case doesn't apply because constitutionally judges are in a whole separate section of the Constitution. Therefore, this is totally legit, executive power.
Right. Certainly those who believe in very strong executive power would, side with you on this particular argument. I think there are some stronger arguments that come, first of all, from, definition of the word pardon. So some people look at this and they say, pardon doesn't mean I forgive myself. Like pardon in just the word. And if you look back at the word as it was meant, means one person excuses somebody else. I pardon you. So it's inconsistent with the language. As I said before, the history. There are also other parts of the Constitution. Like there's a different part of the Constitution that says, if you're impeached, that does not mean that you then, that doesn't count, for instance, as double jeopardy, like you've been tried for a crime. So the Constitution itself says that if you're impeached, it only means that you're being, if you're impeached and then voted to have removal, that just just means you're going to be removed from office. That doesn't mean anything else. And same, if you are not impeached, you can still be judged by any other court. So it seems to me like there is a sense that presidents would be subject to criminal courts under some circumstances. And that does inconsistent with this notion that you could give yourself this kind of blanket immunity from ever being prosecuted for anything that you've ever done up until the point at which you leave the presidency. So I just think those arguments are strong, combined with this historical argument that the founders would not have been contemplating this. They wouldn't have thought of it. There are things in the Federalist Papers that seem inconsistent with it, that are basically that idea, not necessarily exactly that a man can't be a judge in his own case, but that no man's above the law, and that, that even impeachment is the main check. But there are other checks on presidential power, and the pardon itself is a check on judicial power, but it also isn't endless. We have a system of checks and balances where it's like every power you have has some limit because it's being checked by something else, and that really is the structure of our Constitution.
So much to contemplate. I mean, if for all of the guardrails and barriers that have been destroyed during this presidency, it almost makes you think it's a logical conclusion that we might go there and knock down that barrier and see what's on the other side. But Greg, we covered the full Nixon. We covered the full Trump. You told us before, what was the last one called?
The Switcheroo.
The Switcheroo? What's that?
All right. Well, this is my personal favorite. Doesn't mean that I think it's going to happen, but the one that I like the most. So in the same memo that the Department of Justice drew up for Nixon back in 1974, it said, no, you probably can't pardon yourself, but if you were to invoke the 25th Amendment, you could temporarily step down and then potentially be pardoned by the vice president, who would temporarily take over, and then you could snap back into the presidency and just carry on and finish your term as if nothing ever happened.
Right, hang on, let me stop you there. Greg, let me stop you right there. You said the 25th Amendment. That's the Constitution. How? Like, what is that? How do you use that?
So the 25th Amendment, which I understand was passed after the Kennedy assassination, basically creates the possibility where if the president is incapacitated for a little while, he can write a note and send it to Congress. That's important. So he can't just do this in the dark and we never know about it. He has to tell Congress about it, that he's temporarily stepping down for a little while because he's incapacitated. The language is really brief in the Constitution. It's just this one little paragraph, Section 3 of the 25th Amendment, which lets the president just step down for a little bit. There are past precedents with this. George W. Bush, for example, used it to have a colonoscopy for a couple of hours, and while that was happening, and he had been put down, whatever you want to say,
put down. Under anesthesia. I'm sorry, we had to put him down.
He's fine. So, what I meant is he was having a colonoscopy, and during that time, Vice President Cheney became, technically speaking, for a couple hours there, acting President Cheney. So the idea in the Switcheroo is that Trump could basically use this loophole in the Constitution to tell Congress, hey, I need to stop being president for a couple hours because I'm just too grumpy to be president right now or something. I don't think he has to explain why. He just has to say, I'm incapacitated right now. And during that time, Vice President Pence becomes acting President Pence. He can just sign the papers and then snap back into the presidency. Switcheroo.
Okay, now that's a lot. Rebecca, Greg, would that work? I mean, there is the 25th Amendment. It allows for this switcheroo scenario. Do you have to actually be incapacitated, or can you just do it why ever?
Right. I don't think I think Greg's right that there's no system of checking, to make sure you're incapacitated. I think the assumption is that presidents would be reluctant, are using this when, sparingly. They would only want to do it when they really have to because, it's a sign of weakness and also you're giving up power. And so I don't think there's much of a check on when they do it. So I think Greg's right. He could probably just say, I am incapacitated at the moment and send that along. And that would trigger this temporary position for Pence that the president has some control in regaining. So he can't just suddenly declare I'm now capacitated or whatever, if that's the word. But through a process that wouldn't be too difficult, he could then regain power. So yeah, I guess that would technically work. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't. I'm not sure, and I mean, Greg prefaced it with I don't know that he would do that. I'm not sure it's better for him politically than just stepping down 1 hour before the end of his term and making Pence president that way, except for the implicit confession, I guess, that's reminiscent of Nixon.
Right. So, Greg, I mean, look, maybe constitutionally it would work. The 25th Amendment is in the Constitution. But as you're describing it, something occurred to me, and that's that it's gross. It's gross. It's wormy. And
you have such fun sensibilities, Todd.
I do. I'm a little. I am a little. I am a little naive and sensitive for this job covering this administration, but. Mike Pence likes to preserve kind of an angelic reputation for himself. And we're told he has future presidential aspirations. This stinks, man. Would he do it?
So that's the big question, at least in my mind, is, Trump has shown no compunction whatsoever about just going ahead and using whatever tool he can get his hands on to further his interests. But Pence has managed to kind of dance between the raindrops to some extent, stay out of a lot of the worst fallout from the Trump administration. He's always kind of managed to be gazing approvingly at Donald Trump while somehow never being on the spot when the cops show up. So you got to wonder at what Pence is thinking at this point. And yet, it seems like if President Trump really leaned on him, you could imagine that Trump might be willing to make the threat of kneecapping Pence's future political aspirations in MAGA world. And we've sort of seen him do this with, for example, Jeff Sessions, who refused to fire Mueller, refused to unrecuse himself from the Mueller investigation. And then you saw Trump, really kneecap Jeff Sessions. And when Sessions tried to run again for his old Senate seat from Alabama, he lost to Tommy Tuberville, partly because Trump, really just brought the hammer down on him. So, you gotta, if you're Mike Pence, there's a lot of delicate calculus going on here of how you can best preserve your relationship with the boss while also trying not to muddy yourself up too much with some smarmy constitutional back and forth. So you got to wonder how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca, Greg is getting at something important in my view, which is there's this place that's at the nexus of politics and the law, which sort of says even if you can do it, it doesn't necessarily mean you should. So I give you that.
Yeah, I mean, that place has been significantly eroded during the course of the last 4 years. I mean, I think that place is huge. Normally, the number of things that you can get away with, especially if you're president of the United States, is huge. And most presidents are constrained by certain norms and traditions that make it such that they don't exercise every last power that they have. They use their discretion such that, not to say there haven't been like really awful, really corrupt presidents in the past. Of course there have, but there have been very few who have no respect for the norms, don't even try to pretend that they're abiding by them. And it's part of Trump's superpower that he is able to run roughshod over these traditions without having that hurt him. In fact, the opposite, which is, I think that makes him more loved, at least by some segment of his supporters. So the question is, which of Greg's suits that style more? And in my view, it's the full Trump. I mean, which is sort of, I think, where Greg was going in the beginning too, because that's the one that's like, it's so brash. It's like, I have all this power. I have infinite power. I can use it any way I want to. Other people might have been shy of you doing that because it seems like, there's something wrong with it, but not me. And I'm going to, I will fully do that. And then I will use my public platform, like I'll use Twitter, to make it very clear that the only reason I did this is because everybody else is corrupt and everybody else harasses me and everybody else is, a evil villain. And so that is what I think he would do rather than one of these things, which I think you're right. It looks wormy, and wormy is not his style. Like his style is do it out in the open. Don't do it, just plow right through. And so that would be my prediction. I think those are a great way to split up the possible ways in which he could do this. It really helpful. And in my view, I just think he's going to try that, and he's daring somebody to come after him. He's looking at Biden and just saying, like, just try. And if nobody tries, it doesn't get tested, and that's the thing. It's actually really disturbing because if it doesn't get tested, does it become precedent? Does it become something that people look back on and they're like, oh, well, Trump did it? And it does, right? Because we're all looking back at Nixon and nobody challenged that. And a lot of people are thinking, oh, it'd be fine to give those broad open pardons because Nixon did it. Ford did it. So does that happen now? And that's, I think that's of greater concern because I do think it's smart for Biden, and it seems to be his message to be like, I'm done. Let the annals of history judge you. But if he does that, there are implications for our constitutional history and for the future that are very, very concerning.
But just to be clear on the law here, Rebecca, because you alluded to this before, if Trump were to self-pardon and say, I dare you to try to take it away from me, you can't just challenge the pardon, right? It would have to be challenged in the context of somebody challenging him, somebody indicting him for a future crime, and then challenging the pardon, saying, no, we can go after you for this crime.
Yeah, right. You need like a case or controversy. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's like Trump, when he's like, oh, I'm going to go into the Supreme Court with my election cases. And then he seemed to have learned that you can't just march into the Supreme Court. We have these rules. And I mean, that's one of them. Somebody can't just say oh, I don't like that. I want to challenge it. There needs to be a case or controversy. So the way in which I foresee a case or controversy coming out is somebody indicts Trump some U.S. attorney's office brings an indictment and then he challenges that indictment saying, I pardoned myself. But you have to have an indictment before that happens. And who's going to do that? That's a main issue.
So it's interesting, but by doing the self-pardon, not only does he get to be brash and controversial and massive about it, but he actually does one of his favorite things. He puts the ball in Joe Biden's court, right? I mean, it sort of makes it somebody else's problem. I did this. I'm going to get the Twitter juice out of it. I'm going to get the sort of self-pitying victimization narrative for the next 4 years and probably protect myself legally. And if you want to try and stop me, Joe Biden, you're going to have to go back on your instinct and you're going to have to authorize your prosecutors to charge me with something. Go ahead and try it. Right. Right.
You have to behave like me because, the point that's the thing. It's right. You have to hit back. It's if you're a bully and you're trying to hit somebody and, that person just sits there. You may feel like you have power, but you haven't provoked them. The question is, what does Biden do? Does he maintain his principles and say, look, I'm not doing anything? And then obviously he tosses it over to his attorney general, but to a certain degree, he picks his attorney general a little bit, knowing what his attorney general is going to do here. So if his attorney general is, say, Merrick Garland, and Merrick Garland thinks to himself, like, I want to return to a world of sanity, bringing this whole big mess into the next 4 years is not the world of sanity. So, he wins that way. It really is part of the way he wins, which is pushing other people who just want to abide by institutional norms, tradition, and the law in a very tough spot. Because if they abide by it, are they giving in to him? But if they don't abide by that, are they becoming him? And is there any space in between?
Greg, that's super interesting what Rebecca's saying. I hadn't considered that before, that one of the side benefits of Trump doing this constitutionally questionable thing, the full Trump, the self-pardon, is that it actually puts his hated successor on the spot. It's like, it's your problem now. I'm either going to get away with this, or you're going to be the guy who prosecutes his political opponents.
Yeah, absolutely. Biden was very clear on the campaign trail that he was going to let his independent attorney general make this decision. Interestingly, his running mate, Kamala Harris, before she joined the ticket, had a different take. She basically said, the attorney general is going to decide this, but we all know there's only one decision they can make. Her view was that if she were the president, her attorney general would have only one decision to make: prosecute. So there might be some interesting discussions about this in the Oval Office as they're figuring it out. Who knows what those conversations sound like? Obviously, Biden is the president-elect. He's going to be the one making the nomination. But his running mate is not exactly on the same page. So there's this huge question of, if you believe that President Trump committed blatant crimes, perhaps multiple types of crimes, and then you say, what do you do about it? Could the country handle prosecuting a former president? Gerald Ford argued that he needed to pardon Nixon because the country couldn't handle it. He wanted to end the Watergate nightmare. And for a long time, that view, that created a huge controversy at the time. Lots of people thought Gerald Ford was just engaging in a corrupt bargain with Nixon, which was never proven, by the way, but people said that. And then years later, decades later, some of those harsh critics went back and said, no, actually, we think that was a good move that you made. It did end the national nightmare of Watergate. It was the right decision. Then later, in the context of Trump, some people started to revise even that decision to say, maybe this wasn't such a great decision. Maybe it emboldened future presidents to commit crimes or to bend the rules or to lean into their worst instincts. And so it's this question of how do you handle wrongdoing by a former president that this country really hasn't grappled with and doesn't really have a playbook that is commonly accepted rules of the game. When you get into a situation where the new president is always prosecuting the old president, that's banana republic territory. That's a terrible place to go. You don't want to make the cost of losing an election going to jail because, this is a really awful place to go. And so actually, Rebecca, I have a question for you, which is, as a former prosecutor, as somebody who's made this decision before about, when do you have enough evidence? How do you think future prosecutors are going to be looking at the question of, first of all, a former president as a potential target? And then what about the question of, let's, for the sake of argument, say that Trump goes with the full Trump. Trump pardons himself. If you're the prosecutor sitting there looking at that selection of facts, you have a big pile of evidence of potential wrongdoing. You got a former president who is going around saying he pardoned himself. What are the various factors that make this case unique from their point of view, and how does it influence the decision-making about what they do?
Right. That's such an excellent question. I'll say just before I answer you one thing about what you said before, which was also really interesting, that I do think that one of the purposes of the pardon power, one of the reasons why we have it, is for this exact reason, which is sometimes you need this valve. That sometimes politics get so heated, and you need a moment to say, okay, that's in the past. We aren't going to fight this battle anymore. We're going to move forward. And Lincoln used the pardon power. Johnson used the pardon power for precisely this reason. Here were these people. I mean, treason. It was like, those are Confederates, and they said enough. Like, we're healing the nation now. So, I do think that that's not only is it an okay thing to do, it's got precedent, and it is part of the reason why we have the pardon power. That said, I do think it's really complicated in this situation because of what I said, which is, what does this do to us going forward? What happens to our political traditions? And, is there a new precedent set that is so terribly, so much terribly weaker than it was before, that we have a situation in which people can abuse power all the time? On your other question about how much evidence one needs, I think it really does depend on on what kind of case you have. So there's an ethical rule that basically says you don't prosecute, you don't continue a case if you don't have probable cause. That's an incredibly low bar. I mean, that's like what you need to arrest somebody. So like, definitely if you're a decent prosecutor, you don't say like, I have probable cause, I'm going to go to the jury, no way. So how much more than that do you want or need? It really depends on the facts of the case, what the crime is being charged, what the other equities are. There's so many different considerations. In this particular instance, if I were a prosecutor that had this fall on my lap, namely the attorney general, because it would never fall on like a line prosecutor to make this decision, but I would want overwhelming proof. I would want it so that it was like, it was just iron. I would want that note we were talking about before, where it's like the smoking gun, like, here's your pardon in exchange for, something like that, because that's a case where you can say, like, how could I have ignored this? Like, how could I let this go? This is just proof beyond a reasonable doubt fallen on my lap. It would be, I would not be fulfilling my duties if I didn't bring this before a jury and indict and then fully charge this case. If there's some question, though, I would really worry, because I think if you don't get a conviction in a case like this, it's so much worse than if you never tried. And, in many run-of-the-mill cases, like, we would say to ourselves, like, yeah, we might lose this, but it's totally worth it, because even bringing the indictment will give a good deterrence. And, we're giving a shot, we're giving a message that, like, you better step away from the line, people who are close to it. But here, as I said before, in any crime like this, like the ones we talked about earlier, you need to prove intent, and intent is so hard. Without that, smoking gun note, like, I'm doing this in order to commit the crime of blah, blah, blah. It's so hard to have that overwhelming amount of proof that I would think that, prosecutors and the attorney general are just going to stay away from this. So I don't think it's a bad bet if you're Trump to do the full Trump, because I think he wins. I think he'll end up getting away with it, as he has with so many different things. And as troubling as that is, I think you have to go through other mechanisms to find a way to hold him accountable. Maybe the state case. I mean, that's not a bad shot. But some kind of some kind of a commission to look into it. Maybe issue a report. That might be also another way to go. So you've got the truth and maybe the reconciliation, but not the indictment.
So Rebecca, let me ask you about that exact point. I mean, that's super interesting and kind of depressing, that probably he wins, and like what it really takes to bring any prosecution, much less a prosecution of a former president, like all the things you have to consider. But you said something at the end there that was super important. Maybe it's the state case. We got to check an important box here. This entire conversation only covers federal crimes, not the state of New York, right?
Absolutely. And Manhattan District Attorney's Office has, as we know, been pursuing a criminal investigation into Trump's organization and his associates. And, it remains to be seen what he has there. Presumably, we'll find out at some point. I mean, I suppose if there is an indictment, if he chooses not to indict, we won't find out. But that is where I have my eyes, because I think it's what most likely would happen. And it's also for conduct that he engaged in when he wasn't president. So I think that's easier. It's less likely to trigger this sort of hysteria. I mean, it definitely will, but far less so than an indictment per se, the obstruction of justice in the Mueller report. So, I think it's entirely possible. Again, those kinds of cases are also hard to prove because, tax fraud is you especially when it comes to real estate things, it's like so fuzzy to prove that he intended to deceive under those circumstances. That's a hard case to bring. But if they've got good proof, if they've got somebody who's willing to flip and help them out, then I think that's the best shot, holding him accountable without destroying the republic in the process.
All right. Well, like Donald Trump's presidency, we are starting to reach the beginning of the end of this sordid endeavor, this conversation. But before we get there, and by the way, start thinking, because the last thing I'm going to ask you both is for your prediction for the most unpredictable, or maybe most predictable, mystery Trump pardon. Like, which one you think is going to surprise and shock people that we haven't thought of yet. So start thinking about your surprise Trump pardons in the waning days here. Before we get there, let's talk real quick about the Trump children. Greg, you touched on them at the top. Donald Trump has 3 adult children, and they all work in the Trump organization. And one of them, plus his son-in-law, work in the Trump White House. So we've heard talk of potential pardons for Don Jr. and Eric and Ivanka, and I'll include Jared since he's a son-in-law. He's in the inner circle there. Aside from just the blanket political statement that we're all the victims of a deep state media witch hunt and Democrats and globalists who hate us, what is the realistic scenario by which Donald Trump might want to pardon his 3 children plus Jared Kushner?
Well, my sense of the situation from reporting on this, from speaking to people on Capitol Hill, from back and forths around Washington, D.C., is that, Trump is probably thinking to himself that there are investigations swirling around him, swirling around his family, swirling around his family business, that he can just potentially make go away, at least at the federal level. So there were questions that had been raised, for example, about payments that Trump made roundaboutly to Ivanka, potentially as consulting fees that helped him lower his tax bills, which came out when the New York Times got a hold of Trump's tax returns. Those are some questions there. Wrongdoing has not been proven or even formally alleged, but there's some questions that potentially on a federal level, Trump could simply make go away. There were some questions about Don Jr.'s the accuracy of his comments to Congress during the course of the Russia investigation. There were some questions about how Don Jr. Behaved during the Russia investigation with the Trump Tower meeting. So there
Greg, the Senate Intelligence Committee referred Don Jr.'s comments in their investigation, right, for potential false statements, potential perjury to the Justice Department.
That's my recollection. So there are issues there that could come back to haunt the family. And then, none of this has, and then there are questions about what, if you imagine a scenario where Trump says, we don't need pardons, forget it. We're just going to carry on with our lives being awesome. You can imagine a scenario where federal investigators might want to know more about the hush money payments to women that could potentially come back to get involved with the family business in weird ways. There's all sorts of things. And I think the big issue here is that we just don't know where this might go. And the Trump family doesn't know either. They know what they did. They don't know what the investigators might accuse them of. So you can easily imagine the Trump family just saying, we're just going to bulletproof ourselves at the federal level with a whole bunch of wide pardons because we can.
So Rebecca, but herein lies the problem, and we've already talked about this. Okay, maybe again, this is just talk. I'm not making any criminal allegations here. I don't have the power to do that. But the reporting on President Trump's taxes showed that he made payments to his daughter as a consultant while she was an employee. That could be a problem. Maybe Don Jr.'s statements under oath could be a problem. There's some discussion that Jared Kushner's potential false statements on his application for security clearance could be a problem. But then I bring it back to something you mentioned before. We're going to do this because we can, but can Donald Trump pardon his children without drawing a roadmap to potential wrongdoing or exposing them legally in other venues, or basically tacitly admitting that they committed crimes?
Right. I mean, if I were, I'm sorry for the siren in the background. If I were, if
You don't
I
live near Don
were,
Jr., do you? Just kidding.
obviously somebody didn't want me to answer that question. So,
Yeah.
if I were advising President Trump, which I am not, if I were advising him, I would tell him to try to ride a middle line, which is to be specific enough that you are your pardon holds up without giving that roadmap. So I wouldn't say, for this conversation that he had on this date or this particular transfer, I would just say in relationship to anything that came out of the Mueller investigation, I issue a pardon. In relationship to anything regarding, statements to Congress, during this period, in order to just limit it a tiny bit, because I do think there is a potential challenge to just for any crime you've committed between date A and date B. And that's the way he should do it. I don't know. He might, again, dare you, just give one of those blanket Nixon, full Nixon pardons. He could do that too.
All right. So be specific enough that the pardon holds up. Don't be so specific that you let people accuse your children of crimes. It's tough. It's tough sometimes.
And particularly tough for him because it's so hard for him to ever say anything without saying, but I'm perfect and my children are perfect. So you can't really issue a pardon and say they're never ever committed a crime. They never ever did anything wrong, but I'm pardoning them. And I feel like that's the challenge for him. You're going to have to, for a moment, actually issue a pardon, which means not, you have to say, I pardon them. And then, he's gonna just jump on Twitter and say, I'm only doing this because everybody else is corrupt and my children are perfect.
The dilemmas of Donald Trump as he contemplates how to pardon his children, indeed, how to pardon himself somehow. Mm-hmm. All right, time to go. But I promise that before we go, it's prediction time. Let's go around the room. Who's your back pocket secret pardon? The one that you've thought of that nobody's thinking about. Everybody's speculating that there are dozens of pardons on that Excel spreadsheet circulating around the office of the White House counsel in the Oval Office. Greg, if you were going to put odds on somebody who's going to be pardoned from Trump world, who you got?
All right, here's my dark horse prediction. I think, imagine these three scenarios that we talked about, the full Trump, the full Nixon, and the switcheroo. Two of them have the same problem, which is that they involve getting Mike Pence to do something skeezy for Trump. Now, Mike Pence, it was just reported this morning, is gearing up to hit the road in January. He's going to go to Israel. He's going to go to Bahrain. He's going to go to Poland. He's going to do this right after he oversees Congress certifying Trump's loss. He's getting out of town. So my dark horse prediction is that Trump will actually be annoyed that Mike Pence wasn't willing to play ball with President Trump and perform the switcheroo. So as punishment, Trump is going to pardon Mike Pence because he's going to say, oh, really? You didn't want to take part in this endeavor because you thought it was beneath you? Well, you're coming with a punishment pardon. Is this likely?
Whoa.
No, it's not. But go ahead and go out on that limb and say, I think Trump's going to be the first president in history to try to stain someone with a pardon against their will.
Greg, is a pardon if you don't accept it? Like, can Mike Pence go like,
I You got to ask the lawyer. I have no idea.
Lawyer?
I don't think there's any, I don't think you get to you get to opt not to take it. No, I think if it's given to you, it's yours. No hot potato.
So I'll teach you to run from my side. I'll grant you a pardon, and now I'll draw a roadmap to some stink on you, Mike Pence. I love it, Greg. It's awesome. Rebecca Roife, what's your dark horse pardon?
Okay, so I guess mine, like Greg, I don't actually think this is going to happen, but I have been speculating, what if he were to just pardon all federal criminals? Like, what if he were just like, I'm burning it down? Like, I don't think it actually fits with who he is, but he is so angry right now, and he does seem to be trying to sabotage the Biden administration as best he could. And I don't know. He couldn't do it because it wouldn't fit with his, with law and order and so forth. But, maybe he could do a whole lot, or like a whole category of crimes, people who are sitting in jail for a whole category of crimes. I don't know.
Now, Greg,
it does sound like a movie premise. Hits a big button.
Right.
All the prisons in America swing open, and he calls it Biden's problem.
Right.
Well, it's awesome, Greg. I had considered the possibility of the troll pardon. I'd considered, I think pardoning Hillary Clinton would be a great one for Donald Trump. I think pardoning Bill Clinton would be a great one for Donald Trump, just to take a shot at them. How many times was lock them up and lock her up chanted at Trump rallies? And logically, since she should be locked up for all of her crimes, a magnanimous presidential pardon would go a long way to tarring her reputation forever. So I had considered that one. Mine were sort of more practical. I say don't sleep on Eric Prince. Eric Prince for sure. Eric Prince is the CEO of Blackwater. Eric Prince is the brother of the education secretary, Betsy DeVos. And Eric Prince probably lied to the House Intelligence Committee when he said that the meeting that he had in November of 2017 to set up a back channel between the incoming Trump administration and the Russian government, he said that meeting never, ever happened. That was a lie. It did happen, and that was pretty much shown in that testimony. So he was referred to the Justice Department. That one's not as exciting as pardoning Pence. We're pardoning everybody, but I say don't sleep on Eric Prince. And don't sleep on Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman either, because they might have some goods. Don't sleep on those two guys. But those are great. I'm going with the Pence pardon. I love it. All right, I want to thank you guys for joining this. We're going to see what happens. Of course, it's going to be a wild and probably somewhat nausea-inducing, maybe depressing month. But we'll come back. Hey, we'll reconvene and we'll talk about this after we're proven right or wrong on how all this goes down. Greg Walters, reporter for Vice News. Thanks, Greg.
Hey, thank you, Todd.
Hey, Rebecca Roife, former prosecutor in New York City in the Manhattan DA's office and current law professor at New York Law School. Rebecca, we love having you here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. It was great talking to you both.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. Vice News. I'm Todd Zwillich with the DC Bureau. Watch those pardons.